Warning, warning.
This video is me rambling on. Try to keep up. It's not very coherent. I'm sorry. It's been over a month since Dark came out, and every single sense in my body is telling me, move on, find a new show. But I just can't. This show is staying in my head and it won't leave. So in this video, after thinking about it for over a month now, I'm going to go through what my interpretation of the time travel in the show is, or my interpretation of how everything fits together in terms of what worlds are created, what worlds are destroyed. Now, of course, this is just my interpretation. If you have a different interpretation, I would love to hear it. So leave a comment below, and then hopefully we can get into a discussion. Maybe you'll change my mind. That's the best case scenario. So before we get into it, let me just say, if you want to see some more TV and film analysis from me, Anthony James, click the subscribe button. I release a new video every Thursday on Dark or another TV show. I've also got a podcast which goes up on Mondays, in which my friend Konrad watches Dark for the first time. We get to hear his thoughts, his feelings, and most importantly, his theories. He's got some stuff right so far, he's got some stuff very wrong. Check it out, it's really good fun. Alright, with that being said, let's get into it. So the first thing that I want to talk about in terms of my interpretation is the fact that a lot of people are questioning whether or not Claudia actually used free will to break the cycle, or whether it still followed the same deterministic view that the rest of the series had, as in everything that happened has to happen again. You can't change anything. You don't actually have free will. So it's a bit complicated, but here's what I think. I think that it's possible that it is actually determined that Claudia breaks the cycle. So obviously this would mean that she didn't use free will. But hang on. I made a load of videos talking about how she's the snake from the biblical story Adam and Eve. So therefore she would be the symbol of free will, the symbol of breaking the cycle. So how can I now say that I think it's all predetermined? Well, I think that definitely they were going from the themes of the snake. They were going for the themes of her displaying free will. Personally though, the way that the time travel works in this show is deterministic. We've never seen an example of something changing the past, or changing the future for that matter. There's also the issue that if H.G. Tannhaus created the time machine to try and go back and save his family, then that creates a paradox. Because how could he go back in time to save his family if he didn't create the time machine in the first place? I'm sure there's other issues, and if I think of them, I'll mention them, but I can't think of any more right now. So first of all, let's explain away the Claudia thing. Now I'm pretty sure I can prove it's determined because Jonas and Altmarta saw each other as children through the closet doors. Now if it wasn't determined, and they weren't meant to be there at that moment, then that wouldn't have happened. Now, yeah, a lot of people are saying that it was just like a magical moment that they went across space and time because of their feelings or their connection together, and that's fine. I'm absolutely fine with that. But in this video, I'd like to put forward a theory as to how it could actually work in the rules of time travel within the show. I'm absolutely fine if the creators didn't intend for it to work in the rules of time travel, but I think I've come up with a way where it does. Having said that, if you're somebody who wants to believe that Claudia used free will, all power to you. Part of me wants to believe that too, to be honest with you. But it doesn't fit this theory or interpretation, so if you don't mind, I'm just going to willfully ignore it. Alright, so let's get into my big interpretation. The first thing is, I want you to really think about the machine that H.G. Tannhaus made. He made a machine that he could tell or put in some information to change something or to rewrite time or to rewrite the universe in some way to make what he wanted to happen. So think about a calculator. In a calculator, you type in 1 plus 1. The calculator then has to come up with the solution. Obviously it does that through its programming, through its code. Very simple, comes up as 2. I am putting across the idea that when H.G. Tannhaus input into his machine that he wanted to save his family, it was the exact same as when I put 1 plus 1 into a calculator. That is, the machine then found a solution. Now, H.G. Tannhaus didn't know what the solution was. Obviously, when I put 1 plus 1 into a calculator, I know it's going to come back 2. But H.G. Tannhaus didn't know that. He just thought, I want it to do this. What I think happened then is that the machine found a solution to the problem. Time or the universe then realigned to create this solution. That solution being that Tannhaus's family are still alive. So, if you're following me, that means what we saw in seasons 1, 2, and 3 with Adam's world and Eva's world, the endless cycle, the beginning being the end, Claudia eventually learning and breaking the cycle, that was all predetermined to happen when H.G. Tannhaus clicked the button on the machine. What we saw with those two alternate worlds, Adam's and Eva's, we saw time's solution to the problem that was saving H.G. Tannhaus's family. Perhaps this was the most efficient way for time and the universe to solve this problem. Maybe not. Maybe H.G. Tannhaus didn't make the most efficient machine. Maybe it could have done it a lot simpler. But this is the solution that it came up with to H.G. Tannhaus's problem. Also, I'll just say, this was a fantastic way to set it up from the creators. They set it up like it looks like H.G. Tannhaus, or Origin H.G. Tannhaus, didn't make the machine correctly at all, and he just accidentally blew up his own world. Now, of course, he didn't know that was going to happen. But actually, his machine did exactly what he wanted it to. Now, this is a point that I've seen a lot of people saying on forums and on YouTube comments and everything. His machine actually worked. And they sort of say it as a bit of a joke, and everyone's like, oh yeah, that's great. But the thing is, I think this is actually the correct interpretation of the show. His machine did work. Like, it isn't a joking point. It did work. Maybe he didn't mean to blow up his world in the process, but it did work. Okay, this brings us on to a really big point. But hang on. If it did work, and they did go back in time, and they did stop his family from dying, well then, how did it all happen the way it happened? Because surely that's a paradox. How can he create time travel to save his family if they didn't die in the first place? Ah-ha-ha, I've thought of this too. Consider this. Why couldn't anyone in Eva's world or in Adam's world stop the cycle, or act in a way that wasn't predetermined? Why couldn't they change something? Well, except for Claudia, but as I've said before, I think her actions were predetermined by H.G. Tannhaus's machine, which I suppose everyone's were, but stick with me here. The reason why they couldn't change anything, well, obviously it makes sense that they couldn't change anything in their own world, because in order for the future to happen, the past must have happened, so it's all interconnected that way. But why, when Jonas went over to Eva's world, why couldn't he change things there? And I think the reason is because those worlds were linked. When they were created by H.G. Tannhaus's machine, they were created to be linked. Obviously linked through the unknown character, which so many of the characters we know came from that relationship he had with Agnes. We also know that it's linked in loads of other ways, like other characters affecting each other. The past, presents, and futures of the both worlds seem to have been created at the same time. So therefore, they are, although two worlds, they have the same sort of past, present, and future, all linked together. So just to clarify, both worlds, Adam's world and Eva's world, came to be at the same time. Both of their past, present, and futures came to be at the same time, whenever H.G. Tannhaus accidentally destroyed the Origin world and created their worlds. So because they came to be at the same time, and they had characters who were going between the worlds, as well as technology being passed between the worlds, this meant that their past, present, and futures were linked and always had to happen the way they did. Take on the other hand the Origin world. Now the Origin world doesn't seem to have any links to these two worlds, Adam's and Eva's worlds, at all. There's no link there. The past, present, or future of the Origin world doesn't rely on anyone or anything from those two worlds. And that makes sense, because the Origin world was destroyed whenever they were created. So when Jonas and Alt Marta went to the Origin world, they had no future there. They had no actions that were predetermined in the Origin world. Now, I think that they were predetermined by H.G. Tannhaus's machine, which sent them on this mission, so to speak. But I think they were able to change the past of the Origin world because their worlds, where they came from, and their lives and their future, was in no way linked to that world. The two alt worlds were not linked to the Origin world. And just to be clear, when I say linked, I mean that their past, present, or future isn't affected by anything from the other two alternate worlds. No past, present, or future of anyone from the Origin world is to be affected by those two worlds. Now, obviously, we know that it does come about eventually because of the machine's interference into the correct timeline because of H.G. Tannhaus, But originally, those two worlds didn't even exist. So there's no way that they have a link into the origin world. Now here's the interesting part. I think there's two ways in which the paradox can be avoided. The first way is that when they go back and stop the car crash happening, that actually splits the timeline of the origin world. Oh, but wait, Anthony, you can't split the timeline unless it's during the apocalypse when time stood still for a minute. True, but that was between worlds that were linked. Perhaps you can actually split timelines in the origin world because the characters who did it are in no way linked to that world. The other way that I think we can avoid the paradox is that when they do go and stop the car, they've actually created a fourth world. Well, kind of like a fourth world. A new version of the origin world. Because remember, the old version was destroyed. So maybe by going into the past of that old version, they could actually create a second version or a fourth world. Origin World 2, for example, we could call it. I'm not really that big of a fan of a fourth world, but I think it's not really a fourth world. It's the third world where different things happen, if you know what I mean. So I think actually the idea of time, it's not like all of a sudden we're going along the timeline, H.G. Tannhaus creates the machine, the two extra worlds are created, and then all of a sudden they don't exist and have never existed. I don't think that's true. I think they've always existed. I think that the timeline actually goes all the way up to 1986 in the origin world. H.G. Tannhaus then turns on the machine, it destroys his world, creates the two worlds, and then through what happens in those two worlds, eventually, after over time, Claudia breaks the cycle, which fixes the origin world or creates this new world. So that is the linear timeline. I think that the two worlds did exist. Just because they don't exist anymore doesn't mean they didn't exist. So in the actual time of the universe, so you could view it like this. The past is the original origin world. The present is the two worlds, Adam and Eve's, the cycle that exists. Eventually, Claudia breaks the cycle, which creates the future, which is the new world, new origin world. So that is actually the sequence of, like, it's not really good to call it linear, but you can sort of view it from left to right. That's the sequence of time and space within the show. So, all of this rambling that I've been doing in this video, let me try and summarize it in 30 seconds for you. Origin H.G. Tannhaus's family die in a car crash. He wants to fix it. He creates a time machine that when he puts in the problem, the time machine creates a solution. The solution is destroy his world, create two new worlds, Adam's world and Eva's world, have everything that happens in those happen. Eventually, Claudia learns enough that she's able to break the cycle. She then sends Jonas and Altmarta through the portal, and they go and prevent H.G. Tannhaus's family from dying. This creates a new world, or a new timeline within the origin world, as well as destroys their two worlds. Whoa. And people say that Ulrich went through a lot to save his son. I mean, yeah, he did almost kill a kid, but my man H.G. Tannhaus destroyed the whole world. Well, there you go. There's my interpretation, or my theory, you could say, I suppose. Pretty crazy. I will also admit that through making this video, the rambling and the ranting that I'm going on, I've started picking holes in this theory myself, if I'm honest with you. So feel free in the comments to just give it to me. Tell me how it's wrong, tell me how I'm stupid. I'd love to hear it, because I'm already starting to pick holes in it myself. But I think it's pretty interesting, so let me know what you think. Also, before I end the video, let me clarify my interpretation of the Claudia cycle-breaking situation, just so we all understand. I think when Claudia killed Alt Claudia and then assumed her identity, she then started learning a load of stuff about the universe. She started studying the floor tiles, watching everyone, getting to know everything, especially on Eva's side where she was sort of spying on everyone. Then I think what happened was we saw a scene where she was sort of, as an old woman, talking to her younger self. That Claudia, that old Claudia, passed on everything that she had learned in that cycle to the younger Claudia. Then that younger Claudia, when she grew older, she had learnt new things. So she actually passed the new things she learnt down to the next young Claudia. So this continued on and continued on and continued on. Eventually, Claudia knew enough. The older Claudia gave her enough in whatever cycle it is, 1 million, 2 million, who knows. Gave her enough to actually break the cycle. Now, there's also some confusion, or some people don't really understand, how did she break the cycle? How did she realize that the origin world existed? I've also seen some people ask, how come Eva or Adam didn't break the cycle? How come Claudia was the one? Well, it all comes down to one thing. No one knew who Regina's father was. Only Claudia knew that Bernd was the father. Now, maybe Bernd knew as well, but he didn't tell Adam and he didn't tell Eva. So only Claudia knew. So when she went to Eva's world, she saw on the floor, on the family tree on the floor, that they put that Tronte was actually Regina's father. So they all thought that Tronte was Regina's father. Claudia knew that he wasn't. She knew it was Bernd. So only Claudia could have figured out that Regina wasn't involved in this big knot that was the intertwined, incestuous family tree. I've then seen people who understood this point then ask, but hang on, even if she wasn't a result of the family tree, how did she realize that must mean there's a third world? Well, it's not necessarily that she started off thinking it was a third world. The way that she probably started thinking about it was, there must have been a time before this incestuous family tree existed. There must have been a time before time travel influenced the people who are alive today. In other words, there had to be a past where there was a flat, straight line instead of the knot that was time. It must have started as linear. I think she probably originally thought that this was like a Back to the Future scenario, where someone went back, changed something, and then that made the knot come into existence. I'm pretty sure she didn't just randomly think there was an origin world straight away. She probably thought that there was a point in the past where everything changed. She eventually then, through cycles and passing information down to herself, she eventually realized that it was an origin world. Now, how she came to that knowledge, I don't know what experiments she did or what information she sought, but that's what she came to. She eventually got there. And that's how she did it. It's all a bit of a bummer, though, when you take into account the theory or the interpretation that I put forward in this video, because it sort of implies that Claudia isn't this badass, intelligent, great person. I mean, she is, but she was determined to be so. And to be honest with you, I'll end the video on this. I really hope what I've put forward in this isn't true, because I like the idea of Claudia breaking the cycle, having free will, being the badass who shot her old self and actually went on and saved her daughter. Yeah, she did all that, but this theory would put forward that it was determined. In my heart, I don't want it to be true, but I think it's still pretty cool to think about. Alright guys, that's it for me. Make sure to subscribe if you want to hear some more dark and other TV, film and analysis. Make sure to listen to my podcast every Monday with Konrad. His theories, some of them are great, you'll love them. Apart from that, see you in the next cycle.